To all of you to this special event. For 8.5 years ago, the attack on the newsroom of Charlie Hebdo hit the world hard, hit the media hard, and hit all of us colleagues extremely hard. The same year, the editor-in-chief of Charlie Hebdo, Gérard Biard, he attended Arendalsuka, and he is back here this year. So we will listen to a speech in approximately half an hour speech on his reflections on the time that has passed since that brutal attack when he lost 12 of his colleagues. He was in London that day, so he survived. After that, we will have a panel discussion. I think, unfortunately, that we won't have time for questions. I'm sorry about that, but I think that all of us have so much to say, but I will try to leave some space for that. So this theme is on caricatures and censorship. It is a part of the main program of Arendalsuka and hosted together with the Tinius Trust, where I work. And we will try to make the best out of it. Please, Gérard.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the Arendalsuka organizer to invite me for this kind invitation. Thank you all for being there. And I must warn you, I will be boring, so please don't fall asleep. And sorry for my English. It's not my it's not my usual language. Let me tell you a story about a very famous newspaper. No, it's not Charlie Hebdo. It's a much more prestigious one. The New York Times. Did you know that in July 2019, this very respectable American newspaper decided to permanently remove political cartoons from its international editions. And that political cartoons had already been excised from the national edition a few months earlier. I suppose this must be what they mean when they say all the news that's fit to print. To justify this radical decision, the editorial board gave the following reason, let's say pretext. A controversy triggered by the publication of a cartoon about Trump and Netanyahu, signed by the Portuguese cartoonist António Moreira Antunes, a cartoon which was considered anti-Semitic. Pretext because with this decision, the management of the New York Times has made it clear that the problem was not anti-Semitism, but press cartoon. The New York Times doesn't want any more trouble. In fairness, press cartoons, caricature, satire are trouble, because they rarely make the political leaders and public figures they attack laugh, because they increasingly trigger eruptive reaction within groups that proclaim themselves the exclusive defenders of a cause or an entire community. I can say that it was a huge surprise. In 2006, the New York Times had refused already to publish, like most of newspapers, the Alan Poston Mohammed cartoons. In January 2015, same thing with the front page of Charlie Hebdo post-attack issue titled All is Forgiven, and portraying, once again, the Prophet Muhammad. The New York Times did it on behalf of decent journalism, concerned with no offending anyone. Once upon a time, the pride of the press was to unleash passion. Now it seems its greatest ambition is to avoid stirring up trouble. Of course, no one dares to pronounce the dirty and uncomfortable word censorship. If the management of the New York Times took this decision, it was just because they didn't want to hurt anyone's feeling, especially those of the oppressed, of course. There is always a good reason. Censorship means no harm. It doesn't wish to prohibit. Its aim is to protect morality, fatherland, sacred values, decency, good taste, institutions, youth, minorities, victims, delicate eyes, fragile ears, shady characters, suffering identities. The extent of its protective mantle is infinite. Censorship protects anything and protects us from everything, starting with ourselves. We were shocked and outraged when the Afghan Taliban demolished the Buddhas of Bamiyan in 2001. We were even more shocked and outraged when, in 2015, ISIS destroyed the remains of Palmyra. We did not hesitate to call them obscurantist barbarians. Bloodshed put aside, we are talking about the same impulse, the desire to erase any embarrassing representation, either because it's considered heresy, or because it is judged offensive, or because it's a source of trouble and we don't want to mess with this or that powerful person, this or that lobby. Press cartooning is unlucky. It can be everything at once: heretical, offensive, and a huge source of trouble. I fear that the manager of the New York Times has forgotten the role of satire and caricature. The first function of satire is to desacralize, to demystify, to desacralize a leader, a belief, or an idea, to desacralize a myth, an idol. By nature, it's not intended for being lovable or to please those who are the object of it. It must be disturbing. Laughter, even the silest one, always disturbs something or someone. Satire and caricature are disruptors. They force us to focus on an event, a personality, and to wonder about what their backgrounds are. Satire and caricature as unwelcome in the world of absolute good that religious fanatics and political Puritans, both left and right-wing, fantasize about. In this world of absolute good, citizens are not considered as responsible adults, able to accept criticism, mockery, contradiction, who can laugh at themselves and others, but as bubble children who must be protected from all germs. Children who, of course, do not draw or write or argue. The situation is quite paradoxical. In Western Europe, freedom of speech and press freedom has never been so protected by law and courts. Despite that, these freedoms are put in jeopardy by individuals or group of individuals in the name of often noble struggles such as anti-racism, feminism, LGBT rights, protection of minorities, etc. These people are mostly activists, very well organized, who lobby on social networks, inside universities, in the media. They produce a puritanical paradigm that suggests a simplistic binary conflict, absolute good versus absolute evil. This childish shorthand is not necessarily a reflection of majority opinion, but it is treated as the correct opinion by many editorial boards. And these editorial boards prefer to comply with it rather than facing troll attacks, calls for boycotts, or even a simply controversy. This self-censorship does not take its roots in the respect of the law, but in the fear of being confronted with public opprobrium. Nowadays, in liberal democracies, censorship is no longer a state prerogative. It strikes mainly from private structures. It serves multinationals, such as Facebook or Google, which do not want to upset their precious users who are monetized data. It becomes a weapon used by associations militating for the defense of strictly sectarian interest, or by groups of purity fanatics on the lookout for the slightest deviance, or even by mere individuals who believe that their emotion or their choices take precedence over any other societal or political consideration. The weight of religious power is, of course, present more than ever. But it's no longer a matter of decency or good morality. Today, the key words are identity, culture, feelings, respect. How can we disagree, since it's not in the name of morality that they want to silence us, but supposedly to fight against ideas or practices which, like racism or homophobia, are already punishable by law? That's precisely where we get to the point. The main characteristic of these self-proclaimed wardens of good taste and behavior is that they do not typically resort to the law. Because laws in democracy generate debates. And this new breed of censors reject debates. They prefer arbitrariness and intimidation to the legitimacy of the courts. They demand cancellation, withdrawal, resignation, erasure, silence, conformism, rewriting, self-denial, and above all, repentance, a good self-spanking. To confront this very pernicious form of censorship is to confront a kind of self-proclaimed popular jury which pronounces sentence without prior trial and which can just as easily be embodied in a multitude of groups with sometimes contradictory motivations, as is in isolated individuals with unfathomable impulses. In other words, the fault can jump out at any time, in any way, in an entirely arbitrary manner. We should be worried. This type of mechanism, designed to generate fear of expressing oneself freely, typically takes place in totalitarian regimes. Because in democracy, citizens must be considered as adults and responsible, not as children to be re-educated and punished, to be unendingly guided and chided. So, are we responsible adults? I wonder. I would like to give you an example of how this self-censorship has become a common impulse. It happened last May. The offense was committed by Swiss artist Miriam Kern. To be precise, by her painting called Folk Abstraction, exhibited at the Palais de Tokyo in Paris as part of an exhibition on the theme of war crimes. This painting shows two silhouettes, one dominant and massive, forcing fellatio on the other, smaller and frailer, kneeling with her hands tied behind her back. You are free to find it disturbing. That's the point. But nobody's forcing you to stand in front of it if you find it unbearable. The artist herself accepts responsibility for the violence of this painting, which denounces the reality of wartime rape. Several extreme right-wing associations, self-proclaimed child protection groups, but also a very respectable and well-known feminist association filed a complaint for glorifying child pornography. The court rejected the complaint and found in favor of the artist and the museum, recalling that context is and that art is and what it allows. Case closed? Not quite. I'd like to say a few words about the way this controversy has been treated by most newspapers. As soon as the first accusation of trivializing pedophilia were made, the media and commentators jumped on board. The painting was described as highly controversial, disturbing, polemical, problematic, very hard to look at. Even the direction board of the museum declared itself aware that it might generate misunderstanding and put mediators on the disposal of possible outraged soul. Quickly, very quickly, the stigma shifted to be completely reversed. The problem was not longer the far right, which after all was doing its dirty far-right job, but the painting itself. In a poor parody of Stalin, whose favorite saying was "no man, no problem," almost everyone say "no painting, no problem." How many times have we heard this argument about Charlie Hebdo, Salman Rushdie, and so many others? This insidious way to suggest that where there's smoke, there's fire. The consequences are incomparable, but this case shows that from now, the reflex is acquired, even in the face of the most rancid extreme right. We don't want any trouble of any kind. Don't shock, respect, no matter what it costs. We should be pleased with the debates and the outspokenness that the Me Too movement has generated. We must fight without any weakness by lawful means against racism, machismo, hatred, and violence of all kinds. But we can do it as though we are punished children. It is only with adult and responsible citizens that we will advance rights and equality, keeping in mind that no rights, even those that appear to us as the most obvious and even definitively acquired. Always and everywhere, there is one abiding truth: you only have the right that you can keep. Obscurantism and totalitarianism are stubborn, and they are always lurking somewhere. Now, before I go further, we have to agree about the meaning of three words: faith, worship, and religion. Faith is strictly intimate. That is what each believer is on earth, and that doesn't concern the state of other citizens. Worship is the way believers express their faith. When this expression is made in a public space, it concerns the state. Religion is the political and social organization of faith and worship. It always concerns the state because it's all about politics. A few words about what we call in France laïcité, which is improperly translated in English by secularism. It's a bit more complicated than that. It is not only about how religion deals with modern societies or a tool for inter-religious dialogue. It's a way to define what kind of society we want to live in. It's a political principle which is inscribed in the first article of our Constitution and which is governed by a law voted in 1905. Article 2 of this law states the essential in one short, clear sentence. The state does not recognize, pay, or subsidize any religion. The state does not recognize any religion. Religion neutrality in France is not a benevolent neutrality, which, like the Anglo-Saxon concept of the separation of religion and state, recognizes all religions. It is a neutrality that can almost be described as atheistic, which recognizes none. The Republic does not believe in God. It considers him to be just an idea among others one. Laïcité is not about freedom of religion, it's about freedom of conscience, which is the right to believe or not believe. Of course, it includes freedom of religion, but this freedom is submitted to the acceptance of other religions, faithful ones just as faithless ones. Because freedom of conscience implies that faith is just one opinion among others. And so is blasphemy. First of all, only believers really blaspheme. To insult someone or something, or even to make fun of it, you must be convinced of its existence, of its reality. Atheists do not blaspheme. When they say Jesus fucking Christ, they mean nothing more than whoops-a-daisy. And when they mock divinities, they do nothing more than they would do with the image of a king, a president, or a minister. For blasphemy is nothing more than the expression of a salutary contestation of power. God's power in this case, which is recognized, let us not forget, only by believers. This is why it is absurd to claim that blasphemy can be experienced as an offense against the whole of the faithful. We feel offended only when the insult or mockery touches what is personal or intimate. Yet blasphemy does not attack the intimate God of each believer, but the public figure of God, the incarnation of the dogma that is supposed to impose itself to the community of the Lordship. And it's the very reason why blasphemy enrages the religious authorities and why they have made it a crime punishable by death in some countries. It upsets a small part of the divine power of which they proclaim themselves to be eternal guardians. The crime of blasphemy reveals the totalitarian nature of religious power. North Korea has labeled camps, religion has the crime of blasphemy. In both cases, individuals are forced to identify themselves with the power and its representations and to be offended when it is mocked or challenged. If they do not, they face a severe punishment. This brings us to the semantic swindle called Islamophobia, which today is improperly considered synonymous with racism. According to that view, it is inappropriate to criticize propagandist, theologian, and religious proselytism. It is inappropriate to condemn the retrograde speeches of preachers and the sexist practices they advocate. It is inappropriate to be concerned about the fate of millions of artists, writers, homosexuals, atheists, feminist activists, or simple citizens who are victims of Islamism terror throughout the world. It is inappropriate to stand aside the vigorously oppressed Iranian and Afghan women. All these statements would be Islamophobia, that is to say, racism. So I ask, who are the real racists? Those who claim that Muslims and all those improperly grouped under this term must obey the same laws and enjoy the same rights that all other citizens? Or those who suggest that they are too primitive to accept democracy and its values, reducing them to their supposed beliefs and tying them forever to an obscurantist text written 14 centuries ago? For the record, one of the first to win the Islamophobia label was Salman Rushdie. Then Taslimas Nasrin, Ayan Ilsin Ali, Kamel Daoud, and many more followed. Islamophobia has been conceptualized on the basis of a deliberately flawed premise. To criticize Islam is to insult all Muslims. To accept this is to accept the idea that all Muslims are inherently Islamists. It is to agree with Trump, with Salvini, with Meloni, with Orban, with Le Pen, who say nothing else. The real racists are those who insist on a so-called Muslim identity. For example, eminent scholars who suggest that those whom they authoritatively group under the reductive and essentialist term of Muslim are disconnected from the world and its changes, that their society is at least a century behind ours, that those among them, however numerous, who reject religious totalitarianism and its social dictats, who affirm their secular convictions, and for some who claim their atheism, are traitors to their culture, pawns in the hands of the imperialist West. That the Iranian mullahs, the Afghan Talibans, the mass murderers from ISIS who stone women, kill feminist activists, whip bloggers, behead apostates, that these dictators and perverse killers represent the real faith of the anti-Muslim world. So much the worse for the million of secular Muslims who think that democracy is more tolerable. I don't know how the things are in Norway, but this is precisely what has happened to the Muslims in France. A large part of the left and extreme left has deliberately allowed a kind of apartheid, which has turned an entire part of the French population into a category of citizens primarily defined by their religion. More than 4.5 million people living on French soil, many born in France and are therefore French citizens, are being assigned to their presumed faith without even considering whether or not they go to the mosque. Racism, political and social discriminations, economic fractures are realities that must be denounced and fought. But they will not be fought by religion, which has never given more rights to women and men, but has, on the contrary, always wanted to take them away. Among the many accusations we had to face since we published the Mohammed cartoons in 2006, one is recurrent. These blasphemous drawings hurt nearly 2 billion Muslims. Nothing less. First of all, this is to ignore the countless Muslims who are atheist, secularist, or simply indifferent. Second, it's an outrageous exaggeration of the distribution of Charlie Hebdo. Because last time I checked, it was still not available in Turkish, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, or Afghan newsstands. As for the believers who have actually seen these ungodly images, they saw them just because politicians and religious gurus have stuck them under their noses. They are the ones who deliberately want to offend believers because it's the best way to manipulate them and distract them from the real issues they have to deal with in their own countries. In September 2020, at the opening of the trial of the January 2015 attacks, Charlie Hebdo republished the Mohammed cartoons. Not to provoke anyone, but just because these cartoons were the main evidence in that trial. As expected, we saw many violent protests in front of French embassies all around the Muslim world. People burned French flags and cursed Macron because he didn't put us in jail for blasphemy. In the meantime, the Chinese government continued to have fun, as it has done for several years now, with the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs who are, let's not forget, Muslims. We are not talking here about cartoons, but about forced re-education, labor camps, deportation, tortures, executions. Some even use the word genocide. Has anyone ever seen an angry mob of Islamists in front of the Chinese embassy in Islamabad or Ankara? No, because there were no protests. There are still no protests, and there never will be any protests. All this is not without serious consequences. For 8 years, the staff of Charlie Hebdo has been working in a bunker, and some of us are under police protection, thanks to them. So I ask, is it normal that in a democracy, in time of peace, a satirical newspaper, a newspaper of opinion, any newspaper, is forced to live under protection? It is normal for a staff of journalists to be forced to meet behind armored doors? Can we, under this condition, still speak of full and complete freedom of press? We have all heard this argument. With the internet, Facebook, Twitter, and the globalization of information, what we say here in Arendal can be heard in Kabul and be interpreted as a personal attack by anyone, anywhere, anytime. So we must be careful. We must measure our words and our writings, always keeping in mind that they could shock someone, somewhere, here or there, far away, elsewhere. Maybe even on planet Mars, who knows? Not that Elon Musk wants to colonize it. We must show respect. We must, at all times, keep in mind the feelings of those who could accidentally read us, see us, listen to us, have heard of us. At that point, it becomes very difficult to practice journalism. If we journalists had to wonder about the sensitivities of everyone on the planet before picking up a pen or pencil, apart from weather forecast or an advertisement, there wouldn't be much left in our newspapers. The only way to respect Muslims, to really respect them, is to stop considering them as a tribe of backward people incapable of understanding a satirical drawing, unable to read a column or to countenance an opinion different from their own. A group of unfortunate, disconnected from the world in which they live and devoid of free will. Of course, there are fools among them. But I dare you to name a single social group that does not have its generous share of idiots. If we have to stop publishing just because some asshole, excuse my French, might read us, we might as well close our doors. To respect someone, anyone, is to bet on their intelligence, not on their stupidity. After the January attacks, the question we were most often asked, along with how are you doing? Was, how do you manage to keep going? Strangely enough, I hadn't asked myself that question. How can you carry on working, writing, drawing, thinking, when the very essence of your work has been targeted? Perhaps the answer lies in another question. How can you stop being what you are? We, staff of Charlie Hebdo, are journalists, cartoonists and writers, but we also are citizens, Democrats, secularists, universalists, antiracists, feminists, Epicureans, laughers and blasphemers. We are everything that Islamic totalitarianism hates. And there is nothing we can do about it. To give up what we are is to give up living. This became even more obvious with the attack of November 13, 2015. This time, the terrorists targeted places they saw as a symbol of the Western way of life, that they accused being lazy and perverted. Places where people go to drink, talk, exchange ideas, have fun and listen to music. But the killer didn't go to shoot people on the Champs-Élysées, which are just as crowded, nor did they attack the Moulin Rouge or any other symbol of what they see as a perverted Paris. They attacked neighborhoods like those you can find in every major city of the world, in Berlin, Rome, Oslo, but also in Kinshasa, Bangkok, Tokyo, Rio, Bombay. ISIS did not attack the Western way of life. Everywhere on earth, even in the depth of Amazonian forest, the Asian jungle, the African savanna, men and women get together to talk, laugh, drink, dance. Because this is humanity, in the first meaning of the word. And that is precisely what has been targeted. ISIS wanted to kill the human part of us. So, how could we stop being human? Many try to justify, even excuse, the attacks on Charlie Hebdo. The purpose of terrorists was to punish our supposed Islamophobia. The same thing was done with the Paris attack. We should have been punished for the French military intervention in Syria, even though France represented barely 5% of military forces on the field. There is no doubt that other justifications will be found for the next terrorist attacks, wherever they occur. By contrast, no explanation was even sought for the hostage-taking and massacre at the Jewish supermarket Le Hypercacher at Porte de Vincennes on January 9, 2 days after the attack of Charlie Hebdo. Nor for the massacre at the Jewish Museum in Brussels in May 2014. Just as these mass murders were a matter of course. For anti-Semites and anti-Zionists, it makes sense. Jews are all around the world are to blame for the policies of the State of Israel. For the others, it's more complicated. We are so used to seeing Jews being killed because they are Jews. Here again, if they would give up being Jews, it wouldn't make any difference. It is the executioner who decides who is Jew and who is not. Today, the executioner has decided that we are all Jews, and there is nothing we can do about it. Ceasing to be ourselves will not help us escape terrorism and totalitarianism. So why not carry on? We might as well while we're still here. Thank you.
So we are still here, and let me invite up the stage Hege Ulstein, who is an author. She's been a political columnist for 20 years and has also written a book on cartoons together with Siri Dokken. Charlo Halvorsen, who's head of humor, I would say, in NRK, and I think you've been it for ages. So I will start with you when we come to the question. Vebjørn Selbekk is editor-chief in the newspaper Dagen. Roar Hagen, who is a cartoonist in VG. And then Mylin Clement, who is cartoonist and writer in the paper on news, Dag og Tid. And my name is Kjersti Løken Stavrum, and I will try to make Gérard more humorous in English.
It will be hard to me because I'm funny in French, but in English I'm
obviously, obviously, and since English is not our primary language to none of us, we will be very boring too. In act of solidarity. Yeah. Okay, but Charlo, I mentioned you've been, in my opinion, you've been head of humor in Norway for
last years.
The last years, maybe my whole life. And
might be true.
Yeah. So and Gérard, he says that we cannot stop being ourselves. So what I'm curious about is, have you changed during these years?
Me myself? I hope so, to the better, of course. Yeah. But
have the audience changed when it comes to how they perceive humor?
That I'm not sure. I think Norwegian audience or Norwegian people are not that easily offended, I think. We had this discussion about the woke culture.
Look at you.
Yeah. We got this discussion about the woke culture in Norway too, of course. But the wave in Norway is much less problematic than in lots of other countries like US and UK and lots of even France, I think. We have had this satire program, Nytt på Nytt. It's how I get news for you in Norwegian for 25 years, even some years more, I think. We of course get some reaction, but not that much. So we may be trained kind of the Norwegian audience to satire. We still have nearly 1 million viewers every week. And of course, it's not that tough as Charlie Hebdo. I have to say that it's a kinder kind of satire, but still.
But you wish it could have been a little bit more punchy in NRK?
Of course, we could, and we have this saying: if it's not illegal, then. But if we doubt if we should publish, we publish to get the discussion public. So, but we're probably not tough enough, and not close to Charlie Hebdo.
Roar, you've also been in the business of humor for a few years.
Quite some time.
Yeah. Do you think that your audience has changed, referring now to Gérard's introduction, where people feel more sensitive and feel more personal, offended, and feeling the urge to tell you that you offend them?
Yes, absolutely. I must say, being a cartoonist, which is what it's all about here, about my cartoonist colleagues who got killed in Charlie Hebdo, among them Tinios, which I knew. Being a cartoonist is not so easy anymore. It has become more interesting. As I started, the most dramatic thing you could do was to do something about sex or the church. That was it. The world was locked down behind iron curtains and such. We didn't know much about the real world behind this. And now it's completely different. Totally turned upside down. Freedom of expression is protected by law. There is nothing wrong with the law. It's as close to perfect as you can get. But as Biard mentioned, there is a popular law, a jury, next to this, which affects your life dramatically. Every cartoonist will know that the moment you make a depiction of the prophet, you will be a kind of person who is to be slaughtered in the street like a goat. It will affect yourself, your family, your friends, your employer, your country. Your government will have a lot of trouble. So what do? You can try to find ways around this, as the politicians are calling for diversity. That's the new slogan, diversity. What does it mean? Does it mean that we are having a separate group of privileged people who is to be criticized, laughed off, included in every term of intellectual, provocations, and the rest is not to be considered responsible, or it doesn't mean anything. They have to be protected because they are kind of victims. This is segregation, and the opposite of what we call diversity. So that's my position. So what we have to do is to find ways around it, to include as many people and groups as we possibly can to keep democracy going. It's not easy, but we can talk about that later.
And you don't draw Muhammad?
No, no, I don't.
Exactly.
Because of what I told you. We don't do that. Cartoonists don't do that anymore.
But Vebjørn, you became famous when you published the Muhammad cartoons from Jyllandsposten in Denmark. And well, that changed your life, that changed your family's life, sure. It changed the safety, as Roa said. But would you do that again, you think? No?
Well, we have done it more than once, but always in an editorial context, not as a stunt, not to provoke anyone. But I think that newspapers should show their readers what a case is about. And when we wrote about the problems in Denmark, the Jyllandsposten controversy and the cartoons, it was a natural thing to do, to show our readers what all this fuss was about. And the center of the debate was, of course, the cartoons. And I think that we should do that again. We should not self-censor. We should always put the press ethics and what newspapers normally do, and that is also to show people controversial stuff. And the cartoons were controversial, but we showed them, and I think after the 2015 terrorist attack, a lot of Norwegian newspapers showed the Charlie Hebdo front page with the prophet on it, and that was in a complete editorial context, and a very good thing, I think.
Hege Vebjørn mentioned that he can do that, but he has to do it with a context. But the challenging thing in the digital age is that you can just take out a little piece of that humoristic cartoon, satirical piece, and then the humor is destroyed.
And I think the cartoonists that Vebjørn printed is a good example, because they were taken out of context when they were used to sort of make the masses angry in the Middle East and other countries. And they were also presented to these people together with a picture of, I think, a Danish pig farmer with a pig mask, and they claimed that this was also one of the caricatures, so they were sort of adding to it a lot more than it was. And I would also like to say to Vebjørn that I think in hindsight, it was a big mistake for all the other media in Norway to let you stand alone the way you did. If everybody had printed them, we would sort of made an army of free speech that would have much more difficult to attack than one single small paper. So I would like to say that.
Thank you.
And when it comes to context, I think if you talk about cartoons, I think they are one of the most democratic expressions that you can have, because everybody can understand them. You don't even have to know how to read to understand a comic, and that's why they were so popular in the first place in the 18th and 19th century. The analphabetism was spread all through Europe, and that was the way people actually got to know anything about what was happening, like we use TikTok today. But in the digital age, as you say, when you have a cartoon or a satire in a context in one culture, and everybody can make something of it, but in a totally different context, then you get a big problem, I think. And not only if it's in Norway or Indonesia or Israel or the USA or wherever, but also inside the country. And when I wrote the book with Siri Dokken, the cartoonist in Dagsavisen that I've been having the pleasure of working with it for so many years, she said that one change that, and I think maybe you can recognize it in NRK also, because one of the changes that she really struggled with was that when the society was very homogeneous, you could know that everybody can relate to this. So you could make a joke about some culture thing and everybody would know who that is or what that is.
Because we have the same references.
Yes, everybody was watching NRK every night and seeing the same things, but that's not the case anymore. So it's very difficult to find that one thing that everybody in 3 seconds can say, and then start to laugh and then stop laughing and think, oh shit, which is what I think a good cartoon is all about.
Mylin, you're the definitely youngest chair. We're closer to retirement on this part of the panel. But you have sort of embarked into a career in cartoonist, knowing all of these things that we have experienced. What would be the prerequisites for you to stay on that career, you think?
What I need is an institution. I need to be a part of something, and I need an editor who I can rely on and who can rely on me. And I'm very lucky because I have that in Dagbladet, my paper. But we have so many young cartoonists without a platform, without a publisher, because Instagram and Facebook, they have none of that. So I wish that all those young, new painters could get into the papers. So when I see you, Mr. Selbekk, I think of cartoons, of course. And do you have a cartoonist in your paper?
No, we don't.
You are very famous for cartoons, you know.
I'm famous for other newspapers.
So what you're saying is that we should consider to increase the level, the numbers of cartoons in the newspapers?
Absolutely. Satire is very important in a good society. And satire is a dish best served fresh.
Exactly.
So you have to have some new cartoons in your paper, Mr. Selbekk.
Salute to that. I see you, but I have to ask Gérard. You started by mocking the New York Times. Do you think that there will be a flourishing time for cartoonists, the young new cartoonists, or the satirists, for instance, on TikTok? There's lots of satire on TikTok.
Yes, but it's something very different. It's on the social networks. It's satire, but it's by communities. You know, it works. It works for social networks. So you talk to your, in a way, to your own kind. A newspaper try to talk to everyone, to everybody. To citizens, and the thing is, as you said, today cartoonists are not employed because of that, because everyone is obsessed by. Not hurting anyone, of course, and to be sure who you are, the person you address. You know who you are talking to.
Yes, and then no, Vebjørn wants to, and you have to answer the question, because I think that your audience is primarily religious, do they have humor? Second question, do they like to be offended?
No, well, some of them have humor. I'm not sure if everybody. Okay. But of course, the religious people are not the best when it comes to being offended. But I think Mylene Clement has a very fair point. And of course, satire will always find new forms. I mean, we have memes in social medias, but I think caricatures and the political cartoons, they are a very special form of art. I mean, they have a very special role when it comes to upsetting pompous politicians, dragging them down from their self-constructed pedestals. I'm not sure if memes and the new internet humor can do that in the same way. So I think we are losing something important when papers, huge influential papers like the New York Times, when they are stopping publishing cartoons, we are losing something very important, in my opinion.
Hege, do you think that Vebjørn would have been that popular in Norway if he had defended...
Popular?
Quite popular. I think you're on the radio all the time. Popular.
Popular.
If he had defended cartoons that were mocking Jesus.
I think he would have been probably even more popular, actually. But I think this is a very messy debate, and I like it because there are no clear answers. It's not black and white. But I think one guiding thought about not only good satire but good journalism is that the job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. So what I mean by saying that, and those are not my words, of course, it's a very intelligent sentence. Can
you have self-humor?
But the point is that there is, like we say in Norway, it's different to kick upwards and kick downwards. And I think in this Muhammad Muslim caricature debate, that is one of very, very many ingredients in the cocktails, because in very many Western societies, the Muslim part of the population is not the part of the elite. They are often poorer, they are often out of work, they are often struggling with racism. So that's one element of Islam and Muslims in the Western world. At the same time, Islam is one of the biggest and most powerful religions in the world, and they have representatives that are some of the richest people in the world. Some of the most violent movements are hiding behind Islam or using it or saying they represent it. So it's very dual, and I think that's one of the reasons that we have to sort of have not only 2 but maybe 10 thoughts in our heads at the same time when we discuss these issues, and I think that's one reason it's so difficult also.
Exactly, and Roar, isn't that really an obligation? And not only are they, like Hege says, but they're also buying all the good football players. And I mean, there are extremely dangerous things going on. Can we trust you?
I've been invited to the United Arab Emirates to celebrate freedom of expression. It was very nice. You know? It was very nice. Right after the 9/11. Well, I want to go back to diversity. The world has become global. So what do we do about it? When we are talking about cartoons, it has this special ability to communicate across languages and such by using symbols. It has a great ability to reflect metaphors and projections. I think the future will mean that a cartoon is a place of projection. You have to do as they did in the Soviet Union or in dictatorship. You have to be not so specifically clear. You have to make enigmas inside an enigma. You have to have a double message or a triple message so that it can open up this very tragic situation of segregation where groups are living separately. So I think a newspaper without a cartoonist, the editor has lost one of his most important tools to be an editor. An editor needs a cartoonist to express freedom. No, I have my editor here as well.
I think that the reason why Charlo has been in office for ages is that he knows what's next when it comes to humor. And Roa says that the next thing is that it's humor that we don't understand. Is that your opinion too?
Humor we don't understand.
More subtle humor?
No, I think quite the opposite, really. Because I've seen some of the humor for the next generation. It's very anti-woke. Even for me, it's tougher than I like. You can't. It's nearly not a joke without pedophile or anything which you don't supposed to make jokes about. So I think the woke movement, if you could call it that, got some reaction from the youth, 17, 20, 22 years old. We see that in the social media. So that is one of the ways then. But might be right too.
The next generation humor.
I think that's tougher than we see now.
That's promising, though.
Yep.
Mylin, you will have the last word, so it had to be extremely intelligent. But I can try to pose a question.
Then I would like to quote Lenny Bruce, a stand-up comedian who died in 1966. He said something like, if you can't say the word fuck, then how can you say fuck the government?
Yes, thank you. I would like to thank the panelists, but I would like to just say a huge thank you, Gérard, for keeping up the good work. Thank you from all of us.
Thank you.
Kjære deg som spring, går her rundt i ring,
Vi ber alle gå ut bak på høyre side. Vi ber alle gå ut bak på høyre side.
Lyset like tru til de slukner.